Hello. Let us continue the presentation on tissues. I'm moving on to connective tissue. You'll recall that the definition I gave you for connective tissues was cells in a non-living background material, and that non-living background material can take on a variety of different forms: solid, liquid, something in between. Connective tissue is the most abundant and widely distributed of the primary tissues, the four tissue types. Most abundant, that means that there's the most of it. And widely distributed means that we find some of it pretty much everywhere, all over the place. As its name implies, its main function is to bind different structures together, support other structures, protect and insulate. That's usually the role of fats, as well as adipose tissue, storing reserve fuel as triglyceride. The blood, transporting substances, or the skeletal system for support, as well as adipose tissue. And connective tissue comes in four flavors: connective tissue proper, cartilage, bone, and blood. And they all have different cell types that occur in them, and they all have different background materials. Three characteristics make connective tissues different from any of the others. They all have a common embryonic origin, and that's not something that we discussed. Have varying degrees of vascularity. Now, there's a word that we've run into before: vascularity. How many blood vessels serve a particular area? Everything from avascular, without blood cells. Bone is highly vascularized. You break a bone and it bleeds. And of course, blood is found in blood vessels, so blood is 100% vascular. And here's the definition: cells in a non-living background material. Cells are suspended in the extracellular matrix. So matrix is a weird use of that word here, but this is the non-living background material. Cells and then the extracellular stuff, or matrix. So this matrix or background material supports the cells so that they can bear weight, as in skeletal tissue, withstand tension, ligaments and tendons, endure abuse. That just sounds bad, doesn't it? I think that means protection. Three main elements. There's that background material, the ground substance. In that ground substance is a variety of different fibers, and they exist in different amounts. Then we find the different cell types, each of these tissue areas. The first two, ground substance and fibers, that's the extracellular matrix, background material, and then we have the cells. Composition and arrangement of these three elements vary considerably. That sounds like fun, doesn't it? But that's what makes the different connective tissues different from each other. So of the fibers, now fiber is long and thin, like a rope is fibrous, as opposed to a lump of clay, which is globular. So fibers, these are structures, proteins, that are long and thin, like a rope or an extension cord or a piece of thread. Collagen is the most abundant. It is literally like rope. Remember, we talked about collagen and the three polypeptide chains that are twisted together to make the functional molecule way back when. It's tough. It provides high tensile strength. What that means is you can pull on it like a rope and it won't stretch or break. Elastin fibers, on the other hand, are made of protein conveniently called elastin, which stretches like a rubber band. So just like a rubber band, when you stretch something out, it recoils. It wants to snap back. And elastic fibers can do that for us. And we don't find reticular fibers all over the place. We find them in a couple of special areas. And we know what that word reticular means. It's related to the word reticulated. Remember what that word is? Reticulated, reticular, endoplasmic reticulum, a web-like branching pattern. And this web-like branching pattern gives structure like a scaffold for various other cells to rest upon. Here's some of the words that, aren't you glad you're familiar with these already, because now they're easy, because you already know these. Blast means to bud or germ, as in to give rise to. And so the blast cells, they give rise to whatever tissue comes before that suffix. So we look down there, fibroblast. Well, what do you suppose a fibroblast does? It tells you. It tells you it gives rise to fibers. Those are the cells that make the different fibers for us. What about a chondroblast? What does chondro mean? This is what I was telling you and why I tortured you with that word list in the very beginning. Because the more you know your words, now you know that chondro means cartilage and blast means gives rise to. And so these are the cells that are going to give rise and make the cartilage. The osteoblast. Now you've got it really figured out. You know what osteo means already. Bone cells. These are the cells that give rise to bone. And in the red marrow of some bones, we find hematopoietic stem cells. A stem cell is something that can, a stem cell is a cell that can go on to become any number of different cells and give rise to, and hemo is blood. So these are cells that give rise to blood. Then we're going to see a cyte. A cyte is a mature cell. And that's when it's just either hanging out doing whatever it does or just maintaining the tissue that's already been produced by the blast cells. And there is a osteoclast. Osteoclast, you know, clast means smash or break. Osteoclast is a cell type that we find in bone tissue. Other types of cell types, other cell types in connective tissue, fat cells. Hey, do these pants make me look fat? No, it's the fat cells that make me look fat. Me and my COVID-19. COVID pandemic, I get 19 pounds gained. Not really, but it feels like that sometimes. Anyway, the fat cells do several other things, but they store triglyceride in a droplet. We have white blood cells in the blood that function in immunity and injury. Mast cells are cells that contain signal chemicals that if there is an infection or injury, they release these signal molecules and it begins the inflammatory response, either healing or the immune response. It calls out the cavalry. There's the mast cells signal something's going on here. And macrophage, the big eater cell, these are the phagocytic cells. These are the body's cleanup crew. Something damaged, dead cells, cell debris. You break a bone, you digest those bone fragments, or some of the usual suspects, bad bacteria, virus infected cells. The macrophage can come to our rescue. Here's a general diagram of a connective tissue, loose connective tissue. This is really typical of something called areolar tissue. We'll get to that in a minute, but let me go through some of this stuff. So we have this big, thick, wish they would show these twisted instead of linear like this, but collagen fibers, the strongest fibers, and maybe the most common protein in the whole body. We have the elastic fiber, a little bit branched in whatever color this is, orange, and these are the body's rubber bands. They can stretch and elastically rebound. The reticular fiber, thinner, not elastic, more branched. This is the fiber type that allows things like white blood cells to sit on it. And find that in lymph nodes in the spleen. And what else we have? Here's a blood vessel running through there. Most adipose tissue is vascularized, except for cartilage. Here's a fat cell. Now, this is actually a better diagram of the fat cell than they have in the fat cell section. So come back to that in just a moment. Here's a mast cell with all this little stuff in there. These are the signal molecules that if something happens in this tissue, it gets releases that. And here's a neutrophil, another type of white blood cell that's like the macrophage, phagocytic. Here's a fibroblast doing its thing. It's making these fibers, producing collagen, elastic fibers, whatever fiber happens to be needed here. Here's another type of white blood cell. Don't always find a lymphocyte out in the tissues, but sometimes. So here's a diagram that will help, like reticular tissues, give us some structure. Connective tissue proper comes in two flavors, loose or dense, and that depends on how many fibers are in the background. Loose connective tissue, like the diagram right here, there's not a lot of fibers. It's not completely fibrous, and there is some background material. Whereas dense connective tissue is mostly fibers, very few cells. So here's the three types of loose. Areolar, that's like the diagram I just showed you. Adipose is fat cells. Reticular fibers dominate. And then we have dense, regular, irregular, and elastic. I'll describe each one of those. It has to do with the type of fibers and their orientation to each other. We have three flavors of cartilage, and then bone and blood. And I promised I would talk to you about this fat cell. So an analogy that's made oftentimes with a fat cell is that it is, or adipocyte is actually the right name for it. Adipocyte. Adipose tissue is fat tissue. Adipocyte is a fat cell. Is that it looks like an engagement ring. So if you look at this, you see, put your little finger in there, and it's got this little thing off to the side that looks supposed to be the diamond. Maybe there's one over here too. That doesn't look like any engagement ring I've ever seen. A little tiny speck of a diamond. This represents the nucleus. So what we have here, this darker circular structure, is a vesicle inside the cell containing a fat droplet. That's the triglyceride, energy storage molecule, and it pushes the nucleus off to the side, which is supposed to be the diamond in the engagement ring. I think you could do better than those. All right, so connective tissue proper. We have, like I said, loose and dense. So let's go through them. Areolar connective tissue is the most widely distributed connective tissue. That means you find it everywhere, almost everywhere, all over the place, but you don't ever find a lot of it. You find a little tiny bit of it everywhere. You find it acting as some of the basement membrane for epithelial tissue. You find it taking up space and acting to bind other tissues together. And we find, like that diagram showed, the occasional fat cells scattered around out there. And some macrophages. Macrophages are all over the place because, well, we never know when we're going to need them. So they wander around. Sometimes they hang out like a guard shack, and other times they go out and then they're on patrol. So here's that areolar tissue. Looks a lot like that diagram, doesn't it? With the big collagen fibers and some dark staining nuclei of a fibroblast here and there. And there's some ground substance, some background material. It's not completely fibrous. And so in this diagram over here, now what kind of tissue type is this? It says epithelium. So this is a layer of epithelial tissue. But what kind of epithelial tissue? This is the apical surface, the free surface, the basal surface, the lamina propria, which glues it to the basement membrane, just a little thin layer like glue of areolar tissue. But what kind of tissue is this? What kind of epithelial tissue is this? You can recognize it. Well, this cell has two nuclei for starters, and it's puffy like a cloud or a marshmallow. And this is representing transitional epithelium. Adipose tissue. So let's see, I talked about this a little bit already. So adipocyte is the main cell, the cell of fat, richly vascularized, lots of blood vessels. And adipose tissue functions as shock absorption. So we'll find some of the fragile organs of the body are covered, protected by adipose tissue, fat, the kidneys, the eye socket, in the eyeball in the eye socket, in the hypodermis underneath the skin, layer for cushioning and for insulation. And no matter where you find adipose tissue, if it's doing something else, it always still acts as energy storage. We'll skip over brown fat for today because that's a little bit more rare. So here's a diagram of adipose tissue. Now, we find adipocytes scattered all over the place. They're here and there and everywhere, just about. Where they predominate, like in this slide, then that's adipose tissue. And here's a nice little diamond ring. Now, even though it doesn't look like there's anything in these cells, there is. The triglyceride just doesn't take the stain. So it looks like nothing's there, but there's actually, this is the actual fat, triglyceride molecule. And the nucleus pushed over off to the side. Here we have a blood vessel. Reticular. It resembles that picture of areolar tissue, but the fibers are the thinner reticular type. So we're going to find this, like I said, as a scaffold for other cells to rest upon. You'll find that in the lymph nodes, the spleen, and to some extent in bone marrow, where the blood cells are being produced. And so here's what we have is the dark staining features are the reticular fibers. This is a slide from the spleen. And we have all these round things here. These are lymphocytes that are hanging out on this reticular tissue and so investigating the blood as it comes by. The spleen takes worn out red blood cells out of circulation, and these cells also are surveillance, looking for things, structures, cells that don't belong. And if they are detected, they are dealt with harshly. Dense connective tissue. So we have three kinds: regular, irregular, and elastic. And I said earlier that which one it is depends on the presence of what fiber is present. And in the dense regular and irregular, those fibers are predominantly collagen. And in the elastic, that's the elastic fiber. And then the orientation, regular, the fibers are all parallel to each other. And irregular, they go every which way. Dense regular connective tissue, very high tensile strength, can withstand high tension and stretching. That means that's because the fibers are packed thick together and they run parallel to each other, literally like the fibers in a rope. And since they're all parallel, and just like a rope, you can tie a rope to something and then pull on it, and the rope will transmit your energy to whatever it's tied to. And dense regular connective tissue is just like that. The example, this is what, when you think of connective tissue, this is what you think of: tendons connecting muscle to bone, ligaments connecting bone to bone. In either one of these structures, the idea is strength, to hold two things together strongly. Tendons and ligaments are poorly vascularized. And that means that the nutrients and raw materials that those structures need to heal themselves arrive very slowly. And these are one of the soft tissue injuries I was talking about earlier, where it's going to take a long time to heal because they just don't have that much of a blood supply. It's mostly fibers. So let's look at the picture. Oh, the wife is home. Hi, sweetheart. She can't hear me because the dishwasher is on. So look at this. This red stuff staining left to right. Those are collagen fibers. It looks wavy. They're all parallel to each other. So if this, say, was a tendon, and we had a muscle over here on the right and a bone over here on the left, and the muscle contracted, it would pull on the bone, and the bone would move. Now, dense irregular. We find this with the orientation of the fibers is going in every different direction, sort of like the fiber of wood in plywood. And what that does is it distributes the force evenly. And where we see tendons and ligaments made of dense, regular connective tissue, where we know one structure is going to be connected to another, we find dense irregular, where we don't know which direction the force is going to come from. It resists it in many directions. And it's formed in sheets. Just really a great analogy is plywood. We find it in the dermis of the skin. So which way is your skin going to stretch next? Well, you don't know. So we find this tissue type spread out that force whenever we get it pulled. Joint capsules. Some joints, we'll be talking about that in lab this week if you haven't already, have synovial joints, have capsules around the outside to help distribute, protect, and contain the fluid, and then also distribute any stress evenly. And even the fibrous coverings of some organs, like the adrenal glands, the spleen, the kidney, all have dense, irregular connective tissue. So when you hear dense, irregular connective tissue, like the periosteum of a bone, dense, irregular connective tissue, spreading out force evenly. And here this picture doesn't look like much. Doesn't look like much at all. If you want to see something really interesting, Google the clouds of Jupiter, and it looks just like this. So I don't ever put this on any of my lab exams because it just doesn't look like much, but just because it doesn't look like much doesn't mean it's not important. This tissue type is extremely important, and we find it all over the place. Like I said, the periosteum of muscles, periosteum of bones, the protective sheath around muscles, the epimysium, perimysium, and endomysium of bones are all made of dense, irregular connective tissue. Dense, irregular connective tissue anchoring the heart, major blood vessels. So even though the picture is ugly and it looks like clouds of Jupiter, it's a very important tissue. And then elastic. Where we need stretching, like some of the ligaments, which are mostly dense, regular connective tissue, but they might need to be a little bit elastic because we don't want them to tear. We want them to hold the vertebrae together as we move around. So we need a little bit of stretching. We get some connective tissue in there, elastic connective tissue. And where we really find where the elastic connective tissue plays a huge role is in the walls of the large arteries. The largest artery in the body, the aorta. When the left ventricle contracts and forces that blood into the aorta stretches to receive that blood, and just like a rubber band. And that plays a big, huge role in being able to pump blood downstream. And we'll learn more about the role of that in A&P2. But those first blood vessels that come off, the first arteries that come off the heart, are called, the category that they belong in is called elastic arteries, for this very reason, because they contain a lot of elastic tissue. There's a beautiful picture for you, isn't it? What is that? I don't know, it looks like the sole of a shoe or something, but these elastic fibers are dark staining. All right, cartilage. Cartilage is the matrix, the background material is secreted by chondroblasts. And then when the chondroblast, which secretes the extracellular background, then when it's done, it's surrounded by the material that it just produced. And then it changes into an adult cartilage cell, chondrocyte, mature cartilage cell, and plays a little bit of a role in maintaining the cartilage matrix, but pretty much it's done its job. These chondrocytes are found in cavities called lacunae. Lacunae is plural. One of them is a lacuna. A lacuna. So in the picture I'll show you, we'll see a bunch of chondrocytes, each one in a lacuna, and there'll be many of them. It's mostly water with some collagen fibers and a couple of different types of proteins, chondroitin and hyaluronic acid. Some people, I don't know for sure, but some people suggest that taking these as supplements help. Um, I took a little bit of chondroitin one time for a while, and it seemed to help a little bit. My knees are terrible, and but it's mostly water, and so it's sort of semi solid. Fibrocartilage has the consistency uh, of, say, the heel of a running shoe. Tough yet flexible. No nerves and avascular. So cartilage is not really going to heal itself. If you get a cartilage tear, you have to deal with it. If it's bad enough, you have to have surgical intervention. Let's look at the picture. Oh, here first we're going to get the three types. All right, hyaline is the most abundant of all the types. These other two are found in special places. Most cartilage is of the hyaline variety. We talked about articular cartilage at the end of bones. That's a special type of hyaline cartilage. So, and bones always start out as a cartilage model and then are ossified or turned to bone as the bone matures. And so it always starts out as hyaline cartilage, even when we're a little baby growing in our mommies. It turns to bone later. Appears as shiny bluish glass. I've never actually seen real hyaline cartilage. I really don't want to, but many doctors have seen mine. So this is by far the most common cartilage out there. Then we find elastic cartilage, and just like it sounds, it's hyaline cartilage with elastic fibers in it to let it stretch, and we find it in our ears and the epiglottis. That's the flap that's supposed to close off the esophagus when you swallow food. Food. There I go. Now I haven't said anything about food this whole presentation. And my wife and I are going to make General Tso's chicken tonight. So, and then we get fibrocartilage. Fibrocartilage has got a denser background material, and it acts as a shock absorber. So we find it in the intervertebral discs, the discs in between the vertebrae, and that's fibrocartilage. The meniscus of the knee, shock absorbing for cartilage. The pubic symphysis between the pubic bones, fibrocartilage. So here's some hyaline cartilage. Here's the background material. The cells look like they're together. Well, here's the individual cell. If we see the cavity is not that big, we look at the diagram, you can see it a little better. We might be able to see a little bit of it right here. This space right here. Maybe another little one up here. Hey, play nice. Barky. Dogs are arguing with each other. So a chondroblast secretes the background material, and then they turn into a mature chondrocyte, and they live in their little cavity there, their lacuna. And so you know what they say? They say, Barky. No, they don't say that. They say lacuna matata. Lacuna matata, right? What does that mean? Because they have no worries. Elastic tissue with some of those dark staining elastic fibers in the background. Pretty much the same thing with more fibers. And extra collagen fibers in the fibrocartilage to give it extra strength. The cartilage is avascular, so it loses its ability to divide as we age, so it heals slowly. Indeed, they do. Later in life, cartilage can ossify, becoming bony type material, leading to arthritis. Yeah, boo hiss, the wife says. Speaking of bone, it's also called, let's just call it bone. Support and protects the body structures. Well, like the central nervous system, completely encased in bone, the skull and the spinal cord. Bone also can store fat in an adult. In the medullary cavities of the long bones, we find yellow marrow, which is adipose tissue. In some of the flatter bones, we have the hematopoietic tissue, which gives rise to blood cells. Bone has a lot of collagen fibers in there, and hopefully we'll get to that in the not too distant future. Has inorganic calcium salts, particularly calcium phosphate salts. Now, it's not the type of salt that you sprinkle on your French fries. This is the type of salt where it's something, a combination something from the left side of the periodic table, ionically bonded with something from the right side of the periodic table. And in this case, it's calcium, two calciums, and a phosphate, which is a phosphorus atom and some oxygens. Osteoblasts give rise to the background material, these calcium salts, and also the collagen fibers. And then the osteocyte, mature bone cell, also lives in its cavities called lacunae, but they've got some more worries because they have to take care of their neighbors. The osteon is the structural unit of bone, or at least compact bone, and richly vascularized. If anybody's ever seen a broken bone, a compound bone, forget that. There's going to bleed. But if you get a broken bone that doesn't pierce the skin, and there's going to be extensive bruising, formation of a hematoma, blood clot inside. Because the bone is living tissue. If it wasn't, it wouldn't be able to heal itself. Here's a diagram. So here's the bone. What bone is this? All right, I agree. I think it's a humerus. And is it a left or a right? Oh, that's a right humerus. And these circular stuff looks like a target, doesn't it? With a dot in the middle. That dot is the central canal. Now, this is a view where we're taking the slide transverse. So the long axis is this way. Transverse is 90 degrees this way. And so whenever we take a picture of a thin section and look at it of something that's cylindrically shaped, it looks like a circle. Just think about if this was a roll of paper towels and you had that and you turned and you looked down the little tube that goes into the holder, this would be the hole in the middle of the paper towels where the holder went. And then you'd have the paper towels in layers, or in this case, lamellae, the term for layers, side of the central canal. In the central canal is blood vessels and nerves. These little black dots, these are the osteocytes. And you see these little spider legs in between them? Those are little structures called caniculi, little canals, caniculi. And so since the lightly staining material in between these osteocytes is solid, there's not going to be nutrients diffusing solid, not fast enough to maintain the needs of these cells in the outer layers or lamellae. And so what happens is, this is a great example right here, a cell that's close to the central canal will pick up oxygen and nutrients and then transfer them to their friends and neighbors out in the outermost layers. You can see that going on over here too. This cell is going to get nutrients from this cell, which is going to get them from these two. And then we get blood, the most atypical connective tissue because it is fluid. And when people ask all the time, how is blood a tissue? Well, it fits the definition. Cells in a non-living background material. We have red and white blood cells in the background material, which is the blood plasma. Out of 100 cells in blood, 99 of them are going to be red blood cells. Their main job is to transport the respiratory gases, mostly oxygen, but they can carry carbon dioxide as well. Then we have the white blood cells and platelets. Those three things, red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets, those are called the formed elements of blood. And then in the plasma, you have a variety of that are dissolved. White blood cells' job is immunity. Sole job is immunity. Platelets are involved in blood clotting. Then there's even fibers in the plasma. They're soluble, so they're dissolved. So they're not real big, and they're dissolved, and they're the solute, one of the solutes in blood. There's a lot of proteins in blood, and the fibers associated with clotting are the least abundant, but they're there, and they're in small amounts, but they're everywhere, because where are you going to get cut next? What part of your body is going to bleed? Usually you don't know. It could be anywhere. So anywhere there's blood, there's the clotting fibers, and also the platelets. And blood, of course, functions in transporting and carrying everything: nutrients, waste products, respiratory gases, hormones, anything that needs to get from here to there. Most of it's going to be carried in the blood. And here's a picture of some blood cells. A blood cell has got a biconcave disc shape. A blood cell is anucleate. It loses it right at the end of its development. It ejects its nucleus, and so then it can take on this biconcave, where it's shaped like a disc and dimpled in. And so when you look at it in the cross section, it looks like a donut. It looks like there's nothing in the middle, but there is. It's just thinner. There's more light goes through the middle. It's thicker around the edges. This gives the cell a tremendous amount of surface area compared to how much volume it has. So now what's its job? Main job: carry the respiratory gases. All right, surface area, diffusion. So when we want something to diffuse real quickly, we want a lot of surface area. And so the anatomy of the blood cell, red blood cell, really called the erythrocyte, lends itself to its job of carrying the respiratory gases, because one of the reasons is because it's high surface area. Structure and function, the way it's put together, promotes its job. Then we got there's 6 different types of white blood cells. You learn more about those in A&P 2. The real name for the white blood cell is leukocyte. Leuko means white. Here the background material is the plasma, and as fragments of cells we have some platelets. They're not labeled, but there they are. And so that does it for connective tissue. Next time it will be muscle and nerve.